Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you all for joining our Pre-Iftar program. We have a special program today with a special guest. We'll get started in just one moment, but if I could just request Brother Kumail to just recite a couple of ayat of the Quran for us to get started tonight, inshallah. Kumail, whenever you're ready, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to just share my screen, but I'll be reading Surah Al-Fajr. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you, Kumail, for your recitation. Inshallah, for today's program, we have a special guest, Professor Hassan Abbas, who I'll introduce in just one moment. But we decided that in order to shift up and kind of change up the way that we've been doing programming instead of sort of a front-facing talk, to speak about Professor Hassan Abbas's new book on the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam. So without further ado, let me introduce Professor Hassan Abbas, who is Distinguished Professor of International Relations at Near East South Asia Strategic Studies Center at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. He's the author of several books, and his newest one is called The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And we thought that it'd be really timely to also have this conversation on this particular eve, as we're entering into the last 10 nights of the holy month of Ramadan. And the first of those last 10 nights, the night of the 19th, also recollects the day which led to the eventual martyrdom and tragedy of the life, in regards to the life of the commander of the faithful, Imam Ali, alayhi salam. And at the same time, of course, during the course of these nights in the holy month of Ramadan, when we look for some sense of inspiration in our obedience, in our worship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's of course no better example, of course, after the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam than Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. So Professor, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate, and I'm really honored to be with you today.
Oh, of course, of course. So, maybe the structure of the conversation for all of those who are participating is, I had a couple of questions that I wanted to share with you, and hopefully we can get some of your thoughts and reflections on some of those things. And then, of course, we can open up this conversation to anyone and everyone else as well. And if you feel comfortable, you can also utilize the chat function on Zoom. You'd also feel free to chat me directly or to the professor directly as well. We could take it from there in terms of going through some of the questions. So first of all, Professor, you wrote a book on the biography, The Prophet's Heir, again, the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam. Why did you exert so much of your time and effort to write about Ali and not about other personalities?
Thank you so much. First, as I mentioned, I'm grateful for this opportunity and looking forward for an interactive session and also learn and have a conversation with you and also the students. First and foremost, I think Imam Ali alayhi salam's personality is so mesmerizing. It's so mystifying. It's also yet inspiring in a sense that no other personality has these attributes other than the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I thought that if I have to bring or if I have to talk about the beauty of the message of Islam, which is so critical in these times because of certain fixations of media or of various governments in an international sense, because what we have gone through in the last 2 decades in the world of terrorism, extremism, I thought there's no other personality which the story of whom will help me tell this beautiful story of Islam and the beautiful message of the Prophet. That's why his personality. I think also Imam Ali's personality is so central to how the message of Islam was shaped in a not only in a historical sense, but also in the modern sense. So his messages, his teachings, and their relevance for not only today, but for all times. And I don't say it merely in a rhetorical sense. I really mean it. And we can talk about some of the aspects later on, but that's the overall reason why I thought if I have to tell the story of one person, it is the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib.
I know that, when we talk about literature around early Islamic history, there is obviously the literature that is available in regards to the life of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And, probably there's no one who has been written about more in Islam, after the Prophet than Ali ibn Abi Talib. And this goes across denomination, of course, across sect, just in the history or even sort of in the academic study of Islam. He's such a sort of magnetic figure that historians have, historically, again, exerted themselves to try to seek and try to understand and try to learn about. Now, as like a student of theology myself and of Islamic law and culture and so on, it was really hard, in my academic sort of upbringing as well, to find like an English text on the life of Ali, alayhi salam, written by an academic. And, why do you think that it took so long?
That's a great question, and that's one other reason why I was bewildered. In fact, whether in my teaching, and my teaching is as a political scientist and a student of international relations, I was teaching mostly courses on security issues, security policy in Middle East and South Asia, but also then very often I was called upon to teach course on political Islam. And although I would always frame it as the idea of political Islam, because there are various versions of it. And within that context, whenever I would like to give examples and the stories and biographies are the best way to tell these stories. And I would think of Imam Ali. I would get some books which were translated from Arabic and Persian and Urdu, not well translated. There was no kind of indigenous effort in English language, especially in academia and even otherwise. I mean, there are lately some books by Raza Kazimi, one of the very beautiful books recently published, but it's a short analytical book. And when I mentioned this, in fact, to my publisher and editor, they were equally surprised. First, they didn't believe me when I said to them, there's no modern Western academic discourse on Imam Ali, in a sense that there's no biography. There are some good books, of course, on Imam Ali, good translations. And you go to any library, as I'm sure you have gone, when I go to Iraq and also to Saudi Arabia even, you'll find in every bookstore some books on Imam Ali, whether you would agree with their focus or not, but none in English. And the reason it has taken so long is partly because the way we have boxed Ali's personality. And anyone who wants to talk about it immediately says, oh, I'm getting into the sectarian zone. I'll give you an example. Just 2 days ago, I was talking to a media outlet of a very important, I'll not mention which outlet, and it was not in US, it was in Europe. And when I pitched the idea, I was told by the editor, well, I can have a book event, or I can interview on the book, but maybe on your previous book on Taliban, because that's so relevant to Afghanistan. That book was called The Taliban Revival. They said, that's so relevant. I said, well, that book was 6 years ago. This is my new book that just came out. And the person said, it's sectarian. I said, so have you read the book? It's not sectarian. They said, no, the person actually belonged to the Shia tradition. And the person said, well, I am going to get a pushback from my colleagues in the newspaper, who will say, you are pushing your agenda. So the people who are actually qualified to do that feel, even this is a Western capital I'm talking about. And that it's a tragedy also. So all the beauty and the statements and the scholarship which is available in various forms and shapes, people have not picked on this because they thought this would be an issue. The same was the issue when it went for peer review. In one case, we were asking for blurbs. One person wrote back, a leading scholar, I'm indebted to them for their support. And they said, oh, a Shia history. And I went back to them. I said, well, can you just show me where you think there's a bias? Because my purpose was to bring forth the message and the personality and the life of Hazrat Ali in a way that is above sectarian agendas, because I've looked at mostly 80% of all the sources as Sunni sources, or al-Sunnah. And I had made a claim in the book early on. I will only pick those hadiths or those references which are accepted in all sides. And I found an amazing consensus in history. But for ourselves, people, because of the modern geopolitics, sectarianism, people have become scared. And I think that's the reason why Western scholars probably thought that if they'll write on Ali, it will be only catering to a certain group of Muslims. I think that is highly mistaken, but that's the tragedy.
I mean, you bring up an important point, and I just want to get your insight on this. Being that you, in your expertise as a political scientist, that is your sort of academic course. What was it that inspired you then to sort of take this route and write this particular text on the biography of Ali? And then a second part of that question is, I know you touched on it, but how can you sort of utilize the life of Ali coming back to sort of your academic work in the classroom, in your research beyond?
Very important question, and it's not that easy to answer also, I must add. I think one reason was I was looking for texts that would help me make this case to the broader Muslim community at one level, that look, keeping aside all the differences which are there, which at times it's okay to even celebrate differences, so long as this is linked to a discourse of respect and a dialogue. However, we need to have such texts, and we need to have examples and stories which bring people together also, which tell us that all of within the Muslim tradition are linked to this one central core message. And the life of the Prophet, as I mentioned, there's nothing more beautiful than that example. He is Rahmatul lil Alameen, but he's also the great model that Quran says the model for everyone is the life of the Prophet. But it is the life of the Prophet which is then reflected through Ahlul Bayt and his close associates. And among his close companions and associates and family members, there's no one else who through thick and thin stood by the Prophet, who was closest to the Prophet in a sense that as a chief aide, as a closest associate, as someone with whom the Prophet shared the esoteric dimensions of Islam, with whom the Prophet shared the knowledge. And he said it so many times, the most famous one, Ana Madinatul Ilmi wa Aliyun Babuha. I am the city of knowledge, Ali is the door. Statement after statement, Prophet had been saying this. So one was to kind of remind the Muslim mindset and the Muslim, add to the Muslim narrative. Even I should not say add to the Muslim narrative, just to remind them and bring forward. That was one reason. And the second one was that for Western audience, they're luckily they're very a good number of biographies of the Prophet of Islam, and I'll come to that a bit later on as well. Those also need a lot to be done. I mean, we still need more biographies of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. However, I thought that the Western ignorance, lack of awareness of some of those issues, how there were severe differences within Islam early on, how were those dealt with? They were human beings who were dealing with these issues. For instance, the messaging of Imam Ali, when he was the caliph, the fourth caliph of Islam, how he dealt with Khawarij. It's very insightful. If we understand Khawarij, we will understand Al-Qaeda and ISIS today. So there were efforts, and that as a political scientist and especially focused on security studies were so relevant to me that I had to, at times, they would explain and try to make a case, some people, that it's linked to the core message of Islam that these extremist notions exist. And you would tell them, no, there was a counter-revolution to Islam. There were challenges to Islam right from the word go. And those were reflected through such people and such challenges. So the story of Ali was the only one which would enable me to talk about the Prophet's life. It would allow me to talk about what happened when Islam expanded and was trying to struggle, finding its space when the times of the first three caliphs. Then Ali himself, the way he fought severe challenges, what Ali's family went through, the legacy, the tragic legacy as well. So that story was the only one, and that's why I thought, okay, this is one story which not only because I like or love Ali, it is purely objectively as a rational choice. If I have to pick one person to tell the story of Islam, it is the story of Ali. That's what inspired me, and that I, even other than my own liking or interest, from a purely political science point of view, the story, and I remember one of my former students who I can now share. I was in a classroom, and it was a course on political Islam. By political Islam in a Western notion, and especially in a defense context, many people think political Islam is all about religious extremism, and that's how it is portrayed. Let's accept that definition for a minute. So I was asking every student, it was an elective course, why you picked this course. And I was teaching actually a book from Leslie Hazelton, After the Prophet, as a core textbook. So I asked everyone, and one student had the kind of, he was very bold, and I liked his boldness. He said, I think most of the problems in the world today are because of Muslims, because of their extremism and terrorism. And I want to learn more about it. That's why I'm in this course. Okay, I went on. Then they read the text. He actually read this text of Leslie Hazelton's book, After the Prophet, within 1 week. We were supposed to cover it in like 1 month. And he came and knocked at my door and in the office. And he was in a very important position. And he said to me, Professor, I've come to a conclusion. I just want to know in one word whether you think my conclusion is right or not. And I said to him, look, it's academia and education is not yes and no and black and white. It's about the nuance. So don't expect a yes. There's no yes and no answer in a course-long semester. But tell me, go ahead. What is the question? And he said, well, it's all about Ali. If Ali was recognized truly, that his traits were accepted and things had gone through the path where his wisdom was utilized by Muslims, things would not have gone to the extent later on with wars and civil war the way it is. And I said, yes, that's a very important point. I am not sitting here to make judgment and to teach you whether this version of Islam is accurate or that version, but this is an extremely important point. If you are clear on this point, and that was also the moment I thought, oh, I need to tell this story in more detail. Sorry for taking long in answering this question.
No, that was beautiful, and I think that was a really important anecdote that also shines a lot of light. And I mean, going back to the first question that I asked, I realized that it's kind of a silly question, which was why Ali, but like why not, right? Why not Ali as well, right? We're talking about, like you said, this confidant of the messenger of God, the husband of his daughter, the father of his of his grandchildren. But then, of course, aside from the familial relationship, again, his charisma, right? His courage, his compassion, his sort of insight, his dedication, his loyalty, right? Quality after quality and merit after merit. This tongue, of course, cannot do justice to the uniqueness and the greatness of someone like Ali, alayhi salam. I think what I'm probably really interested in really learning from you, and I sent this to you on an email as well, is from a very young age, Muslims, and particularly those within the Shia Muslim community, they learn about the life and they learn about the legacy and they learn about these anecdotes and these details about Ali alayhi salam. And I've also been studying the tradition for many years, and I've read many biographies and many stories and many traditions, and spent time studying Nahj al-Balagha and so on and so forth. And there's always something more to learn when we reflect upon his words, or you sort of contemplate upon unique aspects of his life, in the same way that we would learn from the words of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his biography. And of course, like you said, there's a lot of work still need to be done in that dimension as well. But what is the one, or what are the couple of things that you learned, during this research, spending the time, even though you have probably read and studied and have been narrated and have reflected upon the life of Ali for decades? What were those things that you learned that were new during the course of your time with the text, or as you were putting together the text?
Absolutely, great question, and thank you, Sheikh, for the words you used to explain Imam Ali the most beautiful of ways. And I'm also thinking of adding that, and for answering this question specifically, that his role, we are taught from the history book about as a warrior in one phase of his life, as a philosopher, as a judge, or as a wise man, who everyone would rush to find justice. That was so many stories during the times of the first three caliphs, Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Umar, Hazrat Usman, who knew the status of Ali in terms of his excellence and his closeness. And they would always come to him whenever there was a crisis on any Islamic issue. They would refer to Ali on justice issue. Anyone would ask them any in-depth interpretation of religion. To give credit where due, they all would always say, please go to Ali, or please call Ali. So there was recognition. Ali was playing a role as an opposition leader in a modern sense, but it was in many cases, congenial one. What I learned in the process, and when I had started writing, honestly, you're right. I also assumed I have a very good grip on the message. I have a very good grip on the life and all the major elements of the stories. Also, my own upbringing in a mixed background with both Shia and Sunni traditions. I assumed I know both sides of the story also, with half my Shia tradition in family and half Sunnis. I've learned everything. I've listened to all these debates from childhood, so I know exactly. And the more and more I read, the more amazed I've been. And I'm thinking of what would I pick. Even let me just pick, first of all, Nahj al-Balagha. And I learned that this is a selection of Imam Ali's quotes, and that led me to more work. And I'll just mention one by Professor Tahira Qutbuddin, a recent work. She's in University of Chicago. And she picked from one of the Sunni sources also some of the sayings of Imam Ali. Also, some of the other sources that I was able to get hold of. And when I learned especially, and I published before this book a short booklet, which I'll be happy to share with you as a PDF later on. You can share with students if you consider it appropriate. I was trying to convert all the statements of Imam Ali, which were given in the famous letter to Malik al-Ashtar about governance issues. And I thought this will be like a standard narrative of do good, be honest, integrity, all the basic good things we hear everywhere. I was amazed in the depth in which Imam Ali went on, for instance, taxation issues. Or what would a revenue officer do? He would not go and knock at the door of an ordinary person, because what Imam Ali said, I think, will be really liked by the modern economists and modern revenue collectors who will say, don't bother those who are producing the most. And for instance, in one case, this is relevant to Middle East today and South Asia. There were forces coming back from a huge military victory, and those lands were being distributed among the military leaders. And Hazrat Ali said, no, you just give the land to those who are agriculturists, because they know how to make best use of the land. When it comes to, for instance, as a role as a judge, the criterion of the judge, and emphasis on the independence of judiciary. We know of independence of judiciary from the Montesquieu separation of powers in the French, after the French Revolution. We know it as the rule of law idea as a very modern context and a very, very present day, I would say, construct. You read Malik al-Ashtar's letter, Imam's letter to Malik al-Ashtar, and you'll be amazed. And I actually tested that with my students. I used some of the quotes and I would ask them, so who you think said this? Some people said Aristotle, Socrates. Others said, no, this is very modern. I said, what is modern? And this is Thomas Jefferson. And then I would say, no, this is Ali ibn Abi Talib, a great personality of Islam. So these were the new things which I assumed I knew, but when I went deep, I learned new. Also about the esoteric dimensions of Islam. I think today you go to any bookstore in US or Western world, you go to the Islamic Religion Center area section, or in the poetry section, and you'll always find books on Rumi. And for this, I went to actually Konya and Turkey as well. I interviewed and met many of the experts on Rumi. Number one, what had really surprised me was that the dome of Maulana Rum, or Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, within that dome on top of his grave, the names of 12 Imams are written, for instance. And I asked people, I know that Rumi was not known as a Shia, but he was above Shia's Sunni identity. But in his poetry, then I found so much. He's always saying, my guide and my inspiration is Ali. So in the modern Sufi or mystical tradition, whether we call it Irfan or Sufism, it was another question I learned. I knew that all these major systems or circles of Sufism are linked to Imam Ali. But when I went deeper into it, it is another amazing story how every circle, including in the West, which actually is led by many of the converts who have not been part of the cultural context of any, you would say, they are Naqshbandi or Chishti from South Asia. No, they're very, very modern. They were converts. They found religion through their own understanding religion. And they, as soon as the name of Imam Ali comes in, for them, he is the central messenger after the Prophet. So these were the new things which surprised me further, and I learned far more. And one special new thing which I learned was, which I couldn't get confirmed, especially from the religious scholars, but they were ready to consider that Imam Ali traveled a lot, in my view, especially during the time of the first three caliphs. And I had gone to Turkmenistan, for instance, and found a small new city by the name of Hazrat Ali town. And when I went there, I thought there'll be a shrine of somebody who loved Ali. And this was 2019. I've mentioned the whole story in the book. And they said, no, according to our tradition, Imam Ali lived here and he preached. And they took me to the grave of Duldul, his horse. And I realized this is not mere some love or some anecdote or some small story. It was much deeper than that. In many other places in South Asia as well. So I assumed from that, and I did more research. I couldn't find more resources in the history books, whether of the Shia tradition or Sunni tradition, but there is the imprint of Ali is so widespread, and that makes sense. As we know today, traveling is so central to our exposure. It is so central to our knowledge. How can we assume that those personalities who we are claiming were so enlightened and so knowledgeable that they lacked in this sense of a worldly experience of traveling? So these were some of the new things that I learned in the process.
No, this is beautiful. Thank you for sharing. I haven't gotten a chance to read the whole thing yet, but inshallah I will during the course of these days. So thank you for sharing. I have a couple of more questions, but I just want to remind all the participants as well that if you have some questions as well, please feel free to chat them in, and I'll ask them on behalf of you all. Or you can also feel free to, we can also have some time at the end. But if you have any questions in the meantime, please do chat them in, just so that we make sure that we're getting them all in prior to closing out the program in the next 20 minutes or so. Professor, I have to ask you a question because it came up in a conversation between myself and one of my students a couple of days ago. And that was that when I was telling him about the event, I told him about the title of the book. And what would you say to respond to individuals who might say that the title of the book, The Prophet's Heir, is sectarian in and of itself?
Very good question, I must say. And let's go, keeping aside the Muslim history for a second, let's go on the exact focus of what the meaning of the word is. So when we say the word heir, it has three connotations or three possibilities in English language. The word heir has a legal connotation. When I say Mr. X is Mr. Y's heir, it means that person will get the property as a successor, or the person will get some of the other will, that the will be handed over to that person. So let's go honestly, keeping aside any of our identities. What is the implication of the word legal heir, and who was Prophet's legal heir? Everyone accepts, Sunni, Shia, Sufi, you name a group, that Imam Ali was the one who was tasked with the role of burying the Prophet, the funeral. Why was Ali given the task? He was the son-in-law, he was the cousin. So Hazrat Abbas was there, Abdullah ibn Abbas, many of the closest associates, all the cousins, the Bani Hashim. Who was the leader of Bani Hashim? From Abdul Muttalib to Abu Talib to Ali. So Ali was the legal heir. There's no confusion about it. There is no dispute about it. So one issue is settled, legal heir. No one other issue. Has anyone also ever claimed Mr. X, Y, Z, anyone? Oh no, I was the legal heir of Ali, legal heir of the Prophet. Ali took that role away from me. No one has complained. So legal. So the title is accurate when I say the legal heir. The Prophet said legal heir Ali. Second comes, let's come to the political. Someone can be a political heir in the modern day politics, whether you are from the same political party or like in South Asia, you are Benazir Bhutto's daughter of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, or you are Indira Gandhi, daughter of Nehru, or in a modern sense in Middle East, you are Mohammed bin Salman, son of Salman, or you are a king of Bahrain, your father was a king, and you are a political heir, or you're from a political party, that you're a Republican, or President Biden is a political heir, I would say, of Obama in a sense. In that sense, I'm talking about. So the political heirs of the Prophet were the first Caliph Abu Bakr, second Caliph Umar, third Caliph Usman, fourth Caliph Ali. So yes, political heir in a modern mainstream Sunni worldview, the three first caliphs were the heir. Ali was also the heir. So you can't say that Ali was not the heir. Then the question can be, who was superior? And that's a complicated debate, but I'll refer to the one very famous Sunni scholar in Pakistan whose works and who's from Sufi tradition. He's, without getting into confusing students with the names, but I'm saying this is a mainstream thinking, at least in part the Sunni tradition, who had said that, who was asked about who's superior, for example. And he said, well, this was also consensus. When the Prophet had said, Man kunta mawla fahaza aliyun mawla, it was very clear, no one else has claimed that. Many of the other verses of Quran and Hadith, Prophet had said, Ali is to me what Aaron was to Moses. Do we need any more clarity? In terms of the status, even if we don't get into the debate of who comes first or not, Ali was also a political heir. This is accepted by all Muslim sects. Yes, who was superior or not? People would say the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was the last of the prophets. Moses came before him, Jesus came before him, Ibrahim came before him. Can we say that Ibrahim was more honorable, higher in status because Ibrahim was prophet before Prophet Muhammad? We never say that. Prophet Muhammad was the last prophet. So being first or last is not a criterion of who's superior. So Ali's status as a political heir is also established. Third is the spiritual domain. Spiritual, you go just to the 13 major circles of Sunni tradition or Sunni Sufis. Leave aside Shias for the time being, because Shias are upfront claiming Shia and Ali. We claim that Ali is the heir of the Prophet in every sense. I'm just now sticking to the Sunni tradition. Sufi tradition is a massive and major tradition. You go today to Morocco, to Tunisia, to South Asia, to Afghanistan, you name a country. And we often, and this is again Shia Sunni politics, that they at times both groups want to undermine, kind of ignore the Sufi tradition. The Sufi tradition, which is not a new sect. This is they borrow their traditions from Shia and Sunni. Every major tradition would say Ali was the Prophet's spiritual heir. There is no doubt. In the Shia tradition also, you go to Ayatollah Tabatabai and many others. So I am claiming, if in the three major definitions, the legal, Ali is the legal heir, spiritual, Ali is the spiritual heir, the political one is the only one you can say disputed, and that too you cannot take Ali out. So in 3 out of the 4 dimensions, if Ali is the heir, what's harm? What's the bias? What's the issue that we have in calling Ali as the Prophet's heir? But that, if there's a counter argument, if there are any other definitions of heir, I would like to be corrected and would like to be told, and I'll be happy to consider that. But that's my argument.
Thank you. No, thank you. We have a question that came in from one of the participants. And the question is, Professor, what was your methodology in deciding the authenticity of historical and hadith literature over events that different schools of thought either differed in interpretation over or disagreed if they happen at all? So virtually going back to the idea of your methodology in determining which sources you take from.
Very good question, and something on which no one can be definitive. But what I did was, in the book, I mentioned 30 major sources. And on the hadith sources, for instance, although I looked at all the 6 major works, and in the Shia tradition, I looked at all the 4 major traditions of Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Sadduq, Tusi. And in the Sunni tradition, I focused more on Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, and Sunan ibn Nasai, primarily. Not that there's something in other books that I challenge, but these 3 I thought are the most important for a variety of reasons. Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, there's a consensus among the Sunnis also that these are the more important of the 6 ones. Sunan and Nasai is extremely important because he did the most phenomenal work on the Fazail of Ali. And he had produced those as separate as well after the hadith. This was accepted. And when I read about the translations of Sunan Nasai on the Fazail, or the attributes and characteristics of Ali ibn Abi Talib, I was amazed, and I mentioned to some Sunni friends that what I have read today, I think whether it was Nasai or Imam Shafi, one of the masters of one of the major Sunni school of thought, there was no bigger Shia of Ali than Nasai and Shafi. And Shafi was very, very cognizant of that. He said, he was challenged. People said, you are Shia. He said, okay, if love of Ali is Shiism, I am Shia. Go ahead. And he has said things in poetry, which honestly, if I'll narrate, you'll say, this is blasphemy. What are you saying? In one of the most famous poets, I mean, I am reluctant during fasting time to even mention, he said, I'm looking at the attributes of Ali, and at times I get confused whether I should call upon God or Ali. I mean, very problematic, but he was saying in a different sense. So my sources were, I made a claim other than these main sources. I made a claim, and I am accountable and answerable for that, because because if there's a dishonesty, then I'll be held accountable on the day of judgment, which is that at times there are differences, and you have to look at the main central themes, because so many times there were so many distortions that were embedded in Islam. We know that. This is a mainstream accepted view. That's why there is Sahih Muslim. What is the word Sahih? Why Sahih Bukhari? Was there a wrong, incorrect Bukhari as well? Yes, there were, because they said these are the better versions we are taking. So there was Mustadrak al-Hakim of Nishapuri. There was an effort throughout this. In the case of Mustadrak, he said, well, the criterion that Sahih Muslim and Sahih Bukhari mentioned, these are an additional set of hadiths or sayings and writings of the Prophet which have fulfilled the criterion, but why were these not made part of Sahih Muslim or Bukhari? So there has been a debate and dispute within the Sunni tradition as well. What I did was, I picked the major theme, and I mentioned in the book 10 major facts from Quran. And they take those 10 facts as the major symbols. For instance, a very famous verse of Quran, which says, in Surah Nisa, please, I know Sheikh will correct me later on if I correctly remember, but the verse is very clear. Your wali and madadgar, which means your advocate, your supporter, your guide is God. It is the Prophet, and it is those who bow, and while bowing they give zakat or charity.
Surah
Now,
Al-Ma'idah. Sorry to correct.
Al-Ma'idah.
Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 55, yes.
So kind of, it's easy to remember 555, right?
555, yeah.
Exactly, that I should not have forgotten about.
No worries, no.
And
We're fasting.
so this verse, I highly encourage people who are listening, keep aside, and all of us should at times, for rationalities and truth's sake, keep aside our borrowed identities. These are borrowed identities which are important because we are part of those traditions, but these are in an effort to search for the truth. If we find truth wherever it is, and maybe it is beyond all these identities we have constructed. In that verse, the meaning of that is so evident. And no one other than Ali was seen as someone who is the person who is used in the meaning of that sense. Another major hadith, in fact, which is linked to Surah Yasin. We recite Surah Yasin, verse 12. وَمَا كُلَّ شَيْءٍ أَحْصَيْنَاهُ فِي إِمَامٍ مُبِينٍ. It is in main historians and main actually hadith collectors who mention that Hazrat Abu Bakr, the first caliph, and Hazrat Umar, two extremely respected companions of the Prophet, were sitting with him. And when this verse came, they asked the Prophet, our beloved Prophet, who is this Imam Mubin? And the Prophet took a second and he said, oh, Ali ibn Abi Talib is the Imam Mubin. Now the source of this is the first and the second caliph. Is there anybody else who's called Imam Mubin, who's called Man Kuntu Mawla Fahaza Ali Mawla? So I use these ahadith and Quranic verses as the main trend. So if I find later on a hadith somebody saying there was a time when Ali was leading the prayer and he missed the prayer because, God forbid, he was drunk. This is in mainstream history by some people. Because Muawiyah, because of his animosity, wanted to distort. There was a whole institution built to distort verses. The point I'm saying, my role as an academic is, I look at those major currents, those main themes, and I would say this one fact doesn't fit into that major stream and character of Ali based on common sense, based on rationality, based on basic ethics of studying history. So that was my criterion, because otherwise you can take a set of books on the Shia, of the Sunni and the Sufi, and within Sunni 4 schools, by the way. Within Shia also there are huge differences and different meanings of esoteric emphasis and other issues. So if you stick to those fixed boxes of books, you will never be able to find. The best way is to find common consensus. And I used only those references which I found to be the most credible, on which there is not much debate. For instance, one more thing. I highly encourage students and others to read the whole verse, the whole hadith of Ghadir Khum, because about 110 closest companions of the Prophet narrate this. There is no other hadith which is so much solid view. There is no Shia and Sunni dispute about that event. This is happening right before the end of the Prophet's life. And I had realized that it's only the Sufis and the Shias who say that just before that instance where the Prophet had said, whosoever considers me the master should take Ali as the master also, and that this verse that just came before it from divine injunction that, O Prophet, please convey this message that I've given you. If you have not conveyed this message, you have not conveyed anything, or something to that effect. Very strong verse. You would think God has created the world because of the Prophet and his love, in one sense. The Prophet has completed his task and mission in such a phenomenal fashion. He's just few months, 4 or 6 months away from his passing away and his death. He's moving away from this world. And God is saying something in such a way that if you have not conveyed this message, you have not conveyed much. And I said, this is only maybe Shias who are believing it. When I read 2 major commentators of Quran, Suyuti, Jalaluddin Suyuti, and Fakhruddin Razi, in the Sunni tradition, you cannot consider yourself a commentator on Quran if you have not mastered these 2 major works. Even for the Shias, these are very, very respected ones. Both of them mention that this verse came exactly at the moment when the Prophet was decided to stop at Ghadir. From a logical point of view, the debate ends there in many ways. So I'm saying that's the criterion I've used on anything which was controversial. And I thought this is the mainstream Shia view. I went to the sources from the Sunni tradition on some issues which are Sunni sources. For example, and it's only fair that I mention those as well, that what happened during the times of the first three caliphs, was there always an infighting? There was a civil war. We know there was no violence. We know Ali thought that it was his right to be the first caliph, but whether he took up arms, whether he fought with them, whether he was sarcastic with them, whether he was always kind of trying to conduct a coup against them, none of that is true. And I realized that some of the Sunni sources make more sense because they fit in more with the character of Ali. It was not about personal. Let's say, be sure that Imam Ali thought it was his right to be the first caliph, and that his right was taken away. Whether that if that was something that would inspire everything that he was doing and that would drive his character, then Ali is not the Ali that we are trying to project. This was a personal thing, and Ali said, I'm ready to be over it. This is not something as important. This was one of the new realizations I had. Now, this goes against some of the mainstream Shia thinking, if I may say. But I thought this makes sense to me, thinking of a character which is following the character of the Prophet, and we are building that character with certain values to be the model. Ali had to be above that. He was not after power at all. And it didn't matter. People came to him when he became caliph. And my last point, and because the question is so important, and this is again all mainstream Shia and Sunni thinking, when everyone rushed to his door after the tragic death of the third caliph, Hazrat Usman, everyone came to Ali and said, you are the caliph. Imam Ali said, no, thank you. I'm not interested. They went to him again. They kind of ransacked his house almost. Imam Ali said, no. Then the two important companions, Talha and Zubair, came to him. And they said, Ali, we want you to be the caliph. And Imam Ali said, why don't you decide between two of you? One of you should become the caliph, and I'll be okay with it. I'll support you. They said, no, 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 we want you. Then Imam Ali said, okay, if really all of you want me to be the caliph, everyone just go to the mosque. Now, this is again, for this, the sources are all mainstream Shia and Sunni sources, not often talked about. So Ali had emerged as a consensus person, and this comes out from the mainstream sources which are not talked about. That has been my criterion, to pick sources which, not in a choreographed fashion, try to bring everyone together. But I learned that there is so much available in Muslim history and both ahadith of Shia and Sunni, which actually help us come to a main consensus of some of the major, the message and the major about the message about the major aspects of the life of Ali. And that's what I focused on.
Thank you, Professor. I think that one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about how much work I can imagine has gone in historically in terms of the work that you've done, but also those in the past, to really reconstruct which took place kind of within early Islamic history due to the fabrication and due to sort of the work of the Umayyads, who really obviously had this staunch animosity toward Ali and toward his descendants as well, and how that really shakes up the way that we understand just about anything and everything within our practice, be it matters of law, right? Or even sort of many theological components as well. That's going to be for another discussion. Last question, Professor, because it's going to be the time to break fast soon, and we want to give some people some time. And maybe perhaps the most practical or the most really relevant to many of those who are participating, those who are on live right now. Probably I know about most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, fairly intimately. I know them very, very well. There are the students or members of the community, and I'm sure that those who are going to watch this program later as well would probably benefit from understanding just exactly how you think that this particular text or this study on the life of Ali ibn Abi Talib can really influence us or inspire us as Muslims living in America specifically. I again, as I was going through the book, and like I said, I have not read it in its entirety yet. I know that you entitled the last chapter Islam or Ali and the future of Islam, or your conclusions of this text. And so, specific to the situation of Islam in America in specific, as young people, that I like to consider myself one of them, and all of those who are also participating as well. What can this work do, or what can the life of Ali do more broadly to inspire us to sort of move forward?
Thank you very much. It's a very important and thought-provoking question, and it's very important for us to think about it, because religion and the history, it's not expected or supposed to be confined to mere history books, in a sense that that's a part of the faith. But if it is not having an impact on our day-to-day life, that it is meaningless, or if not meaningless, it's not of value to our character. And that's the word I was thinking about, character building. It is so relevant to the purpose. Study Hazrat Ali's sermons in Najib al-Agha about Tawheed, about the oneness of God in terms of the conceptual framework. Read about the aspects of life as a social being, when he says people are of two kinds. Either someone is your brother in faith or your brother in humanity. The equality and the message of the welfare, and I would welfare of the people. I was often thinking, if Imam Ali was today, maybe he would have been in which party he would have picked up. And I often think maybe it was Bernie Sanders. I'm saying it in a lighter way, but also because what is being said often about the inequality and the income disparity, or that I'm sure Imam Ali would have been very supportive of Black Lives Matter, or these issues of empowering the poor. And those are not just because these are popular slogans, or maybe that I'm thinking that the young folks here might be interested in that. Truly, you just have to study Ali's life and you'll see the aspects, the values which are very progressive, the values which are linked to not only modernity in a sense, but linked to interfaith harmony. So on his bed at the last moments, when he's really close to his final moments, and he talks to his son Hassan, the 2 or 3 things that he said to him was about fear God, but he said, number 1, he said, this my assassin or killer, be nice to him and don't kill him till if I'm alive, if I survive, so be fair to him, fairness and rule of law. The second thing he said was, take care of those dhimmis. I mean, at that time there was only some Christians and Jews in that area. So the element of, and this was, by the way, the same message the Prophet had said on his deathbed, very, very similar in words. So in a modern sense, and especially for us living in a society where we are a minority in a religious sense at least, it is the interfaith bonds and intrafaith bonds which are the true reflection of what Islam is all about. And that's where Ali's statements, sermons, ideals that he portrayed, reflecting, expanding in a sense of the conceptually what the Prophet had said, is extremely important. I think Ali's emphasis on unity is the most important thing that we can all learn from. Our communities can prosper and blossom when we are together. And Ali teaches us that. And also his emphasis on knowledge, I think, is extremely important. We know some of the major statements from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, also, but Imam Ali always saying, knowledge is linked to action. If your knowledge will not be converted into action, then God will take away your knowledge. I think extremely powerful that we have to be reflections of what our faith teaches us and contribute towards society. I'm repeating myself, but it's about selflessness. It's about doing for others. It is about the plight of the most disenfranchised. That's the core message of what Imam Ali did when he was the caliph. And that's what the Prophet had said. I think if we take Ali as a unifying force, and I picked Ali because all major sects have this common longing and passion for Ali. So he can bring everyone together within the Muslim context. And then this is his knowledge and his sayings are something which can help the Western world, and especially we are also part of the Western world in a sense, and we are Western in that sense, but non-Muslims to have another look into the practice and ideals of Islam, which will tell them that Ali was talking about rule of law much before rule of law was a fashionable thing to talk about. He was talking about equality much before there was this Declaration of Human Rights by United Nations. He was talking about taking care of the needy and the poor much before communism, or communism in a sense that rights of the people were talked about. That's why Ali is so central to this modern reality, and that's how we should look at him. And that's how we should use his legacy to bring everyone together and to be a force of progress for the international community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. I posted the link for the book, again, The Prophet's Heir, The Life of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Amazon link to everyone on the chat as well, in case that you're interested. And really just sort of to close in regards to your words, it reminded me of those last, that last written will that we have of Ali, which is narrated in Nahj al-Balagha, like you had mentioned, to his closest children and confidants now, after he tells them, to have piety and have taqwa in Allah. Immediately after that, he says, care for the orphans and the widows, right? This idea of selflessness, this idea of generosity, and so on. And that's really the spirit of Ali, and it's the spirit of this month, and it's the spirit of this of our messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'm posting one more link in the chat. I know for those of you who participate in a lot of our Islamic Center programs, you have heard this already, but the Islamic Center in our community is trying to raise funds in order to help and support members of the community across New York City who have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, issues of homelessness and food shortage, and how it's plaguing our community. We're all very well aware. By the end of this evening, we are a couple of $1,000s off from getting a $50,000 match from a member of our community. If you take a look at the link, alhamdulillah, we are at $340,000. And this is zakat eligible if you are Shia, you follow Ja'fari fiqh. It's also khums eligible at the Office of Sayyidi Sistani. Please do your best to contribute or take that link and share with family and friends as well, so that we're able to live in the legacy of Ali and live in the legacy of our messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and really take blessing and benefit from this sacred and holy month. Professor, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to hopefully seeing you in person soon, inshallah. And more than that, for those of you who have not taken a look at the book already, please do. In the case that you're interested, you can also feel free to reach out to me if you don't see the link in the chat for whatever reason. Happy to share that with you later on, inshallah. Thank you, Professor. Inshallah, we'll see you. Keep us in your prayers the next couple of nights. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.